After another day of trying to meet deadlines and working on projects, you're again dissatisfied with how much you did and how well you did it. Then you go home, grab a bite to eat, and then you go to your kid's concert or a sporting event. Then you come back home, you see that big house chore that has been waiting for weeks. You sigh, you drop into bed thinking, what's wrong with me? Why can't I get more done? We are constantly colliding with our limitations.
We think that it is because we are fallen, sinful people. We think we're bad. But what if? What if our limitations are a gift from God? That this is part of the very good part of being a created being. What if we are actually not supposed to carry the burden of trying to be something we are not and cannot be?
Our guest on this episode is theologian Kelly M. Kapic. He's professor of theological studies at Covenant College. He's written a book that addresses this guilt we all experience when we feel that we should always be doing one more thing. Its title is You're Only Human: How Your Limits Reflect God's Design and Why That's Good. This book has won a number of awards, including Christianity Today's Book of the Year Award in the category of Popular Theology. We're glad to have Kelly on the podcast. Here's our interview with Kelly Kapic. Welcome to the Reintegrate podcast, Kelly.
Oh, it's so good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm Bob, and this is David.
Well, nice to meet you guys.
Yeah, it's good to meet you as well.
I'm on staff with CCO, so I got to see you speak at Jubilee, and I thought, I got to get this guy on. And then David used to be a student leader of mine at Kent State University, and then he came on as a fellow. Go ahead and tell him a little about yourself there, David.
Yeah. So I did a fellowship year with the CCO, helping Bob with the student organization at Kent State. And then...
Bob, are you still at Kent?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, Kent and Walsh University and Malone.
Oh, but yeah. Bob, you do some stuff at Malone as well?
Yeah, I'm at two Kent State campuses, the main campus and the one in Canton. And because I actually live in the Canton area.
Yeah.
And so there's two colleges in the Canton area that I work with too. So that's Walsh and Malone. Yes.
I've done some stuff with Malone. That's how I know it. So David, you've been also, you're with them too.
Yeah, I was. Okay. Yeah, so I did that for a year and then I went into marketing. So now I work in the digital marketing space as a social media manager for a local marketing agency here in Canton.
Great.
And I've been doing that now for 4.5 years. But still good friends with Bob, known him throughout college as he was a good mentor to me. And then he asked me if I would come on to co-host the podcast with him. And
nice.
Hey, sure. Yeah.
I love it.
Kind of the vibe of this thing is if, you got a 60-year-old, you got a 30-year-old, two different generational perspectives. Yeah. David is excellent to bring in, what does it feel like and look like for 20 somethings to go through all this stuff. So
that's great. That's a nice mix.
Yeah. So that's why we do it this way.
Great.
You were a keynote speaker at CCO's Jubilee conference where I heard you talk about this topic we're going to be talking about today. And many of us are still talking about that talk you gave. It was one of the attendees' favorite talks. I can tell you hit it out of the park.
That's very kind. Thank you.
And so I was eager to book you so our audience here on the podcast could hear your important message. So let's start out with that story that you tell in your opening chapter. A few years ago, you were on another podcast, one with an audience of moms, right, who primarily spend all their time caring for their young children. So near the end of the interview, the host asked this question: so any other big theological concepts that we moms should major in? So what was your answer, and why did you answer it that way?
Yeah, I mean, it was a niche podcast, which was part of what made it fun. It was this woman who's primarily talking to other women who were with young children and trying to think about things. And she wanted to have me on to talk about based on an earlier book called The Little Book for New Theologians, and to help her audience realize theology really mattered. So yeah, she got to that point and said, so what big, and she was trying to throw me a softball. It was, sweet. And I think she thought I was going to say some high octane doctrine like the sovereignty of God, right? Or the holiness of God or whatever. And I just told her, actually, I think finitude. And she just kind of was like, I don't even know what that means, but let's talk about it. And it was really fun. It was a great thing because finitude just is a fancy word for meaning limits, limits of space, time, knowledge, and power. Like we have bodies, we're only one place at a time. We have brains, but they can only know so much, right? We only have so much energy. And so finitude just means limits, but the Christian word for that is creature. And to be a creature is by definition to be finite and limited. And so in that podcast, part of what we started talking about, I just said, I know when our kids were little and still to this day, it's been really important to think about limits and the goodness of them rather than because kids are often so exhausted. We have them going to endless activities, endless things. And anyway, so we started talking about burnout for kids and parents and various things like that. That's a little of the background of that.
I did the same thing. It's like, my goodness, my son Joel was like, okay, school from 7 in the morning till 3:30, and then he he had to go to band practice, and then he had to go to soccer practice, and then he had to come home and he had to practice some more band, and then he had to do his homework. And it's like, okay, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. I guess I'll go to bed now. It's like it was insane. And now I lead a home group, and most of the people in the home group are parents of kids that are going through this again.
Yeah.
And I love how you frame it in the book. You're like, what are we doing to our kids, and why are we doing that? Or what are we trying to give them self-esteem by giving them all this too much stuff?
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of those fascinating things too, because I remember slowing down and just starting to listen to the vocabulary I use and we often all use when, you ask someone how they're doing and obviously we often say, I'm doing fine, but sometimes we're a little more honest, but we use words like we say, I'm stressed. I'm so stretched, I'm running thin or I'm running on empty or I'm overwhelmed or I'm buried. And you start to look at that vocabulary. So often it's as if things are being done to us. And I do think it feels that way. And sometimes they actually are being done to us. As parents, we feel like, well, of course I need to take my kid to all of these events and to do all of these things. But actually, it's worth asking, is it of course? Because we are being discipled, our kids are being discipled, but often not by the church, not by scripture, not by faithfulness. So it's just worth thinking about. I'm not really interested in legalism or shame. I'm interested in liberty and joy. Another thing is just, like with the parent, we do keep the kids, this is all pre-middle school, but we keep them so active, it has created these other problems. And now, and again, I don't want to be overly reductionistic and reduce everything to this, but in the endless busyness, one of the things that can happen is a lack of resilience, a lack of an internal world. I know when our kids were little, there would be times and kids come up to my wife or I and they say to their mom, I'm bored. And she said, oh, good, we're finally getting somewhere. She wasn't going to come up with an activity for them to do. They needed to figure out something to do, or she'd go, okay. And she'd start giving them chores, So it's one of those fascinating things that I find all of us as adults, it's stunning how we really struggle to be comfortable in silence and stillness. And that's, again, one of those unexpected things. So we can talk about any of those things if you want, but those are...
we sign our kids up for more activities, hoping that they'll eventually succeed, right? And until they do succeed, we lie to them. You're amazing at everything. You're going to be great. And we think we're increasing their self-esteem, but it actually undermines it because nobody is excellent at everything.
No, yeah.
Few of us are excellent at one thing, right? And so what we're doing is why you have this story in your book is that this is a book about human limitation.
Yeah.
And if we're not teaching our kids that they're actually limited,
that
they you're not going to be Michael Jordan. There's one Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, it's one of these fascinating things because psychologists will tell you self-esteem is one of those psychological ideas that got picked up in pop culture and then profoundly misunderstood. And so one of the things that a good psychologist will tell you is the danger with the way we talk about self-esteem right now is it misunderstands. So people think you increase your kids' self-esteem by telling them how great they are. But the analogy that one psychologist uses that I think is really helpful is it's kind of like you're driving a car and the tank is almost on empty, but your gas meter stops working and so it looks like it's full. It may make you feel really good driving that car, but when it runs out of gas, it doesn't matter if it says full. It was a lie, right? And so as hard as it can be, there's something really healthy. And so going back to the parenting thing, like when the kids are little, I think it's really important. We had 2 kids and, really important to get them to learn to celebrate one another and not just compete with one another. To realize one is better at something else and even the fact that one is better than the other doesn't mean the one who's good at it is better than everybody else. Just in this family, they're better, right? One of the great things we can learn as Christians with the idea of finitude is to delight in one another. And if we find it very difficult to celebrate one another, that's a sign of some unhealth in us.
Right.
And when we find it difficult to celebrate some of the gifts we have or are using, that's also a sign of unhealth. Like there's nothing wrong. That's not arrogant to go, wow, that's really cool. I could do that. Or I bring this to I can play the guitar and lead all these people in worship. I can't personally do that, but I love when people can, and they shouldn't feel embarrassed or anything about that.
And so it's not just our kids, it's me.
Yeah.
When I feel
well, not me and David, so I'm glad it's about you.
It's just me. It's just me.
This is an intervention, Bob.
Yeah, this is an intervention.
When I fail to accomplish something, I just sigh and say to myself, "Oh, I'm only human." But most of us view this as a bug rather than a feature.
Yeah.
So how does the Bible tell us that God actually created us to be limited, dependent creatures? And why is that good?
Yeah. I mean, the truth is, the reason why I started researching and writing about this, and I've been thinking about for literally over 20 years, is because it's such a challenge in my own life. For me, I get to the end of the day and I hear these voices in my heart and my head saying, Kelly, why didn't you get more done? Mm-hmm. I mean, I love productivity and efficiency. And those are good things. The problem is when they become ultimate things, they're really destructive. And in our culture, in the West, we so highly value productivity and efficiency, it distorts all these other things. So kind of the short biblical argument is that when God made Adam and Eve, I mean, one way to get to this is through the idea of humility, to be humble. If you ask most Christians, why should we be humble? We often will say because we're sinners. And it's true that we're sinners. But actually, biblically, if you try and build the idea of humility on sin, that's what fosters this idea of self-hatred, right? The only way you're going to grow in humility is by focusing on what a terrible person you are, which actually, ironically, can be more self-absorbing. So, yes, self-analysis is appropriate, repentance of sin is appropriate, but biblically, and this gets to your question, if you jump all the way to Adam and Eve and just ask the question, should Adam and Eve have been humble before there was any sin or fall in the world? It's really an interesting exercise to think through because the answer is yes. And so that means their humility shouldn't be based on sin or the fall. And the idea is basically Adam and Eve, as these creatures made in God's image, were made to be dependent on God, dependent on neighbor, and dependent on the rest of creation. Dependent on God, neighbor, and the rest of creation. And so if you just think about how difficult this is for us in our culture, right? If David and I are talking later and he said, hey, you met Bob. What'd you think about Bob? And I was like, seemed like a great guy. Also seems like he's really dependent on a lot of people. In our culture, when is saying that someone else is dependent on others a compliment, right? And yet central to Christian discipleship is growing in healthy dependence on God, neighbor, and a recognition of your dependence on the rest of creation. So it's right at the heart. It undermines our understanding of discipleship. So part of being dependent is you and I are not God. We were never meant to be good at everything. We're never meant to have endless energy, all of that. And it's not even like, you're right, we're not all Michael Jordan, but most of us aren't even like a million places away from Michael Jordan. You know what I mean? It's like, because it still feels like, well, I should be close. No, you shouldn't, actually. You're fine.
Growing up, I thought for sure I was going to the NBA, and I loved
Nice.
basketball as a kid, and I played it all the way through high school and everything, and never really surpassed 5'5", 5'6", and so I was
Yeah.
like, I don't know. And then I'm like, I'm sitting on the bench a lot longer than some of the other kids. I think I got to do something else. But like you said, this is a different way to look at it versus how our culture looks at dependency, almost like it's a bad thing. We've talked a lot on this podcast in the past year about our culture's obsession with time management specifically. While we can all be better at arranging our calendars and making priorities, it's not necessarily bad things. But in the end, we need to realize that the latest technique from that TikTok influencer is not going to help. You write in the book about our relationship with time. The invention of the clock has changed us significantly. Our lives are now plannable, schedulable, and organizable. Even jumping on this podcast, we had it on a Google Calendar with a link and a time and a place. And again, this can be very beneficial. We need this in our life, but it also has some drawbacks. So how can we have a better relationship with time?
Great question. The chapter on time was really fun to research and write. If you had asked me when I started the book, are you going to research clocks? I would have thought it was ridiculous. Like, of course not. I don't, but actually it became super interesting because I had not thought about how significant the idea of clock time was and its development, how it affects us. I mean, we always talk about technology and we're like, oh, smartphones. And that, that's the thing. Or, but electricity is so powerful. But anyways, clock time is fascinating because, people have always been talking about time, but conceptions of time have changed. So often, conceptions of time were related to, you could tell by where the sun was at. So scholars of time, is actually what they call sociologists of time and others, but they'll talk about a distinction they make between contextual and non-contextual views of time. And this is really interesting because you can both look at history and you can look at much of the globe to this day to see this difference. So contextual time is the idea that your context influences how you experience time, right? So the sun is up, your body clock's going, your blood sugar level's at a certain level. So context is everything, right? Night, day. When you look at the Bible, it's interesting. They don't say 9 o'clock in the morning, but there are like in the Hebrew Bible, there are like these 9 different times of day. They'll talk about the breeze before the sunrise, and these, or the highest time of the day when the sun's up in the middle. Those are all contexts that are telling you, quote unquote, what time it is. And so, like in our day, cultures that are driven by contextual views of time are what they call event driven. So if there's a meeting in your village, the meeting lasts as long as it's a meaningful meeting, right? But we in the West live in what they call non-contextual time or clock time, which means it's the time of the clock. So we don't even think about it. We say, hey, what time is it, Bob? And we look at our watch and we'll say it's 2 o'clock. But that's actually just shorthand for the time of the clock is 2. And I know it's a long answer, but here's the point. In a non-contextual view of time, every minute, every hour is just the same. So when you're in a culture that's about productivity and efficiency, if it's 10 o'clock at night and you have quote unquote work to do, you turn on the electricity, right? Turn on the light, open your laptop, and you have an hour of work to do and you do it. You don't care that your blood sugar is at a totally different level. The context of a child screaming in the back who can't sleep and a sick grandparent or, all these other things, none of it matters because context is irrelevant. There's always time. And that the consequences of that have been devastating. Back in the 40s, there was a famous essay called The Tyranny of the Clock. And the last thing I'll say on this is back in the 40s, he said, this is what separates modern time, modern people's experience in the West, more than anything else from the past. And I don't think we realize how much clock time, which really gets translated as productivity and efficiency, is profoundly shaping and misshaping our lives.
My wife, Linda, read your book and had a major aha moment. She teaches at a physical therapy and occupational therapy school in Haiti.
Oh, wow.
So when she teaches a class, for the last 5 years, she's been teaching via Zoom from our living room to the Haitian classroom, right? And the class is supposed to start at 9 a.m. It's supposed to end at 4 p.m. And she got all that material to teach. She's teaching in English. They have to translate it to French to the students. The two students ask a question in French. They have to translate to English to her. She's like, it takes twice as long as any other class, right? So Linda wants to be efficient with the time. But these Haitians are not so interested in that.
Yeah.
She realized by reading your book, you explained how different cultures relate to time.
Yeah.
That these Haitians seems to be more being present in the moment. They don't worry about being on time. She's like, it's break time. Come back in 10 minutes. 15, 20 minutes later, they're still socializing and having a great time. And then she says, when they celebrate something, it's over the top. It's like, celebrate their graduation. It's like we get to watch it on Zoom, and it's like, okay, it's the third hour. When does this party end?
Yeah. It ends when it gets boring.
Right? It's like, okay, now it's I think it's done. So then they go home. There's no start time and end time for them.
Yeah.
So we Americans, the 21st century, we never fully are present.
Yeah.
In the moment we are in and with the people we are with, especially now with our phones constantly vying for our attention. So how can we learn how to be present and not so worried about time efficiency?
Oh, it's such a good question. I know for myself, one of the things that really started to hit me, and I think you put your finger on it exactly in terms of the word presence. I think that's a key word there. And I think one of the things, and I wouldn't even necessarily want to put them in a particular order. I just think they're profoundly interconnected. I could make a case, I guess, for either direction, but in a world of endless, we talk about the attention economy and everyone wants your attention and endless distraction. We all know how hurtful and difficult it is when you're trying to talk to someone and they are not with you, right? They're looking at their phone. They're not like, you have got to keep people's attention. It's very hard. Yeah. That's really painful. There is just all these studies you guys probably know about in terms of skyrocketing loneliness, the loneliness epidemic. So you have that, but it's also related to just think about being quiet and still with God. And I started to think, as scary as it is, whether it's with students or others, sometimes like, we're going to be quiet. And it's almost like sometimes if they've never done it before, let's do this together. And let's even just be quiet for a few minutes before you start thinking you have to pray, because God is right there. But anyways, it's something about learning to be attentive to God's presence in the midst of the flurry. And by learning to be present with God, I do think we can learn to be present with other people. And there is something about learning to be still with God, praying with God, wrestling with God. Sometimes wrestling with God means like, God, like, where were you? Why didn't you do this? Why did you let the wicked prosper, etc.? Like, this is not mystical abstraction. This is honest, genuine love and communion with God. But learning to be with God, I think actually strangely enables us to be more present with people too, which I do think is a massive skill or need in our day, however you want to put it. Have you guys seen that?
Oh, just a little bit. It's like I do college ministry. What are you talking about? Do I see that?
Yeah, that's true. You're right. Yeah.
So how does this connect with our limited humanity, this presence, so that we understand why we're talking about that in this context?
Yeah. Yeah, it relates because part of what's interesting about the attention economy, whether it's Facebook, TikTok, all of that, is we have commodified, we've made your attention financially important. And so everyone wants it. And the reality is you and I are finite. We only have so much attention.
There you go.
And so part of it is what will and who will we give attention to? And to tie it into what we were talking about earlier in terms of clock time and productivity and efficiency, like, again, I love to be productive. I got a big to-do list right in front of me right now, right? I love efficiency. But the painful truth I realized is, like, the most inefficient thing you can ever do is love somebody, right? Or a puppy. Because when you love somebody or something, it makes demands of you. It doesn't fit your schedule. It's complicated. It's difficult. And it's all about productivity and efficiency. Love gets undervalued constantly. And sadly, I see it happening in the church.
I think a lot, just because in my world as a social media marketer, I know the stat that you have 2 to 3 seconds to get somebody's attention on social media. That's it. That's all you have. So as someone advertising for a company, I know that someone scrolling on their phone, I have to stop them within 2 to 3 seconds. I feel like when I started my career, that number was actually even higher. And it's quickly dwindled.
Yeah.
And it usually has to be over the top. It usually has to be, you say something controversial right at the beginning, because then you tie them into the conversation.
Or show them an image that spikes or something.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much science to it behind it all. I actually have a friend who also works in social media marketing, and he's been doing it for longer than myself. And he actually has this data where, it'll actually track where your eyes are moving on an ad and see like the hot spots of where did people stop. And so there's so much science and data behind all of this that when I look about how we have real conversations, I feel like people in their 20s and 30s, even a lot of us have grown up with the phone in our hand, and a lot of us have grown up with, I don't like what this person's saying. Swipe. I'm bored. Swipe.
Yes.
And we can't swipe necessarily in front of somebody's face, but we do by directing our attention somewhere else, or by gazing somewhere else, or just saying, okay, see you later. We're choosing to swipe away from these conversations when they don't feel good, when we're bored, whatever it might be. And it's because, social media specifically, these algorithms are built for that, literally with the science behind it. They're built to keep your attention because that's how they're making money. And so in terms of how we see that in society and how culture, it's literally, I feel like, become a part of our identity of how we engage with that and how quickly we can just bypass a conversation.
Bob and I both work with college students, and it is interesting how, now it's kind of even passé to talk about, they don't really know how to answer phones. Like, literally, all of a sudden, they pick up and they're talking. You're like, oh, what about hello? And all of that. But also to end conversations. And that's kind of a silly example, but there is that. You're absolutely right. You can be in a group and you can see something uncomfortable happen. And they haven't actually been mentored, haven't had the socialization to see what's your next step. And someone will just literally walk away because it's uncomfortable.
The phone isn't a phone. It's a texting machine, right?
Right.
It's like, I'm going to ask this girl out. What are you going to do? Going to message her. Like, why don't you just walk up to her and ask her out?
Yeah, she's right there. Yeah. I do think it fosters some disembodiment, which is a struggle for us as well. We have this body, and it's good, and it's beautiful, and it's small. So it's a fascinating thing how it affects not just this rush to constantly work, but undermining our physicality, undermining the goodness of our bodies. In the book, there's a chapter on what I wanted to call the chapter is Thank God for Mary, but that becomes a subtitle. But it's all about Mary and the importance of Jesus's humanity. And there was an early church father named Tertullian who has this whole extended talk where he's talking about Mary's afterbirth. And you're like, what? Is this irreverent? Like, can you imagine your preacher doing this? But his whole point was people were denying the full humanity of Jesus because they thought it wasn't spiritual. And he's like, no, God is the creator. He's not embarrassed by our bodies. He's not embarrassed by our smallness. And Jesus, the Son of God, becoming truly human, is the great affirmation of God's love and delight in the creation. He never expected creation to be anything other than creation. So to complete that thought, that's been really helpful for me to think through is the goal of the Christian life then isn't to become superhuman. It's just to be truly human. Mm-hmm. That's it. That's the goal of Christian life. Go therefore and make humans. But I don't mean making babies. I just mean helping people realize as a human, you're made to love God, love your neighbor, and relate to creation. That's the beautiful extent of it. It's not that you need to be this bigger, stronger, faster thing. And if you can do that, now we're talking about human flourishing.
You know, just speaking of the phone calls thing, like I had to make a phone call today, set up an oil change appointment, and I find myself even then with this anxiety of like, oh no, I have to get on the phone.
Yeah.
And I've done it. I mean, I my generation, I was like right on the edge where I didn't grow up with iPhones. I got it like later.
Right.
But it's still like I have to work myself up to make a phone call. And I'm like, why is that so hard?
Yeah.
And Bob and I were talking before we even started recording this podcast about that topic of younger people needing that face-to-face time to get out of their phone.
Absolutely.
Because there's a whole other element to that. There's a whole other element to this human connection that God created. And exactly what you're saying too, you know, with this finite body, like God has already called it very good. He called it very good in Scripture. And so just with what Jubilee is all about, we often think of starting the gospel with the fall. So like, okay, I'm broken. This is broken. I need to fix it. Where God says, no, I created the world and it was very good.
Yeah.
Let's get back to that. Like, let's redeem, let's restore and get back to this. Here on earth, let's start now. Let's start exactly what you're saying of realizing that we're human and starting those connections with other people and showing them Christ through that.
Yeah. And in that creation narrative, when God is saying good, 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 when it comes to humans, he's talking about finite human creatures. That part of the goodness is we are glorious small creatures. And it depends on your personality and season of life and what's going on. Sometimes we need to be reminded we are glorious. And sometimes we need to be reminded we are really small. And both of those are good. And, you know, for me, for example, I remember my wife and I got married in 1993. And long story short, we didn't have kids for a long time and then had children. And when they were small, 3 and 5, my wife got cancer. And during that season, you know, praise God, she's alive and well. But during that season, I remember you never know how you're going to respond. I didn't know if I would just be angry and, you know, maybe in a different season. But it didn't turn out I was really angry. But it was interesting to me to see what I had actually kept praying day after day. And I realized so often the only thing I would pray is I started praying, God, I'm so thankful I'm not you. I'm so thankful I'm not you. And what I realized when I reflected on my prayers, I realized, oh, I would have never told anyone I thought I was God. But it was like I thought, if I didn't pray for people, things were going to happen, you know, or whatever. I somehow thought I was controlling or I was responsible for this world. And it was so utterly clear I was not. And God was still God. And for me, it was one of those beautiful things where God's like, I love to use you, but I don't need you. So you just rest for now. And then when you're doing a bit better, we can talk longer, right? But we don't need to have long conversations right now. God's like, I'm fine. I'm not an insecure God. I'm here. It's fine. And for me, that was so beautiful and liberating. And it's counterintuitive, but to realize God is totally fine being God, and he's totally fine with me not being God. That was beautiful, really helpful for my Christian life.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, amen to that. That we have a God who's not insecure, and we
Yeah.
have a God that says, "Hey, there's going to be seasons of life where, you're not able to show up fully in a prayer,
Mm,
or you don't even know what to pray. Hey, it's okay. It's all right.
mm,
I'm here when you're ready to pick yourself
yeah.
up, and even while you're sitting there, I'm not leaving you.
Yeah.
But it's okay to be small and
Yeah.
broken because it's how I made you,
Yeah.
and I still call it very good.
Mm,
It's a beautiful thing.
mm,
I think on the other end of the spectrum, and we've talked a little bit about this already, but the anxiety that it can bring
mm,
to feel the sense of like, oh, I have to do more or I have to be more, or
mm,
what we said at the top of the podcast of going to bed at night thinking I could have done more.
mm.
And it causes this anxiety. I see it so much with young people, college students. If you just got married, if you just started your career, why aren't things this much better? Why isn't this
Right.
happening for me? So how can the doctrine of human limitation actually free us from this anxiety?
I mean, as you can guess, there's no short answers, but I do think there are some practices and some things that we can do that are really helpful. Um, One is starting to be more communal rather than individualistic, right? This whole idea that I'm a self-made man, that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard, and I just really want that myth to die. And to make it quick, some listeners may be offended I just said that, but I'll just like, if you come and show me that you don't have a belly button, then we can talk, right? But the belly button, as Stanley Hauerwas said many years ago, like, is of great theological importance. You're not a self-made man. You didn't birth yourself. And I would just add, like, you didn't pluck every chicken. You didn't create the sewer system that you were dependent upon. And so we live in a culture that celebrates this idea of radical independence when the truth is we are totally dependent. And the fact that we're not aware of it doesn't make it not true. It just makes us ignorant, right? And so we really do need one another. And that can be very helpful. It can, like, well, I'm assuming many of your listeners are college students. So here's just a kind of a physical or concrete example. One of the things I discovered early on with alum is they'd be out for a little bit. And then I would talk to them, and they would often say the thing that really surprised them when they graduated and moved on, that unnerved them, is how little physical touch they were getting. See, when they're in college, you run into each other, you hug each other, you're on a couch together, you're wrestling on the grass. It's just all like normal. But then you graduate, and everyone's like, you should live on your own. You should be independent. People will tell me they literally can go days, if not weeks, without any meaningful physical touch, which, as you know, makes us super vulnerable in all kinds of ways. But that's nothing you need to feel shame that you need that. You're a creature who's made for physical touch. Now, that's why we have to have healthy, appropriate touch. Very clear on that. But there's just all of these things that become very important. And those kind of things even relate to anxiety. The more we feel alone physically, emotionally, relationally, the higher their anxiety can rise because we are trying to play God's role. So we really need one another. There's various things. The last thing I would say, like as just a concrete practice that I think really helps, is to foster what I would call lament and gratitude. Lament, these are both very, 35% of the Psalms are laments where it's like, God, where were you? Why have you forsaken me? Which sounds so anti-Christian, but it's actually in the Psalms and on Jesus's lips. Like all these strong laments, which often seem to us to be a lack of spirituality, surprisingly, counterintuitively, when you're telling God, hey, I thought you were this kind of God, what's happening? It may sound like a lack of belief, but it's actually a great sign of faith. It's actually a sign that you're a dependent creature and you know the one who is in control, and it doesn't look like it makes sense from your perspective. So actually fostering lament in the midst of injustice and pain is super healthy. And the flip side of that coin is actually fostering gratitude. All good and perfect gifts are from above. And learning to delight in an apple, in a good conversation, being able to remember something, in a handshake that's actually firm, whatever it is, to start to live in gratitude is also affirming our dependence on God. So strangely, lament and gratitude are two sides of the same coin, and both affirm both our creaturely limits and our dependence on God. And both are really needed.
I think that is very, I don't want to say underrated, but
Mm,
when you leave college, like I did, I don't know, I graduated in 2017. Um, and, when I left college, I think there was a lot that I had to learn.
mm,
Um, but I think one that I took for granted was the community. I mean, you had built-in community,
yes.
essentially, whether
Yeah.
you're being in a classroom or the student organization that you're a part of, you have built-in community.
Yeah.
And when you leave college, no one's handing you a schedule. No
Mm,
one is saying, here's your class times where you're automatically going to get to know other people. It's
yeah.
really on you to make some of those new
Yeah.
connections. Um, and so I think loneliness plays a huge factor when you leave college
Yeah.
because you're like, how do I do this?
Yeah.
And the enemy loves nothing more than making you feel like you're alone and that hey, you have to figure this out. It's all on you.
Yeah.
You have to buy the house. You have to get married. You have
Right.
to get the perfect job. And if you don't have those things, you're failing. You're short.
Right. Yeah.
The enemy loves that.
Mm,
So bringing in those other people definitely is just helpful. And yeah, just a small moments of gratitude, I think,
yeah.
are life changing, honestly, of
Yeah.
just, hey, I was able to go on a nice walk today.
Yes. Walk's super
Changed
healthy.
everything.
Yeah, I do.
Um,
For me, that's one of the biggest answers I've discovered is walk. But even as you were
yeah.
talking about that, I love what you were saying, David. And like, I often tell students, college students, hey, go to your church. And if you don't know any, ask the pastor for for an older saint, right?
Hmm.
Someone in their 70s, 80s, 90s who's been walking with Jesus for a long time. And ask if there's any way you can go have tea or coffee or a meal with them. And it takes some courage, but it's very interesting. Both the young person and the older person are often nervous at first. But what's beautiful is they both actually need each other. And it
Yeah.
is not just the older person with all of their wisdom. It's often the young person who brings joy and delight and curiosity. And it's so mutually enriching. And I know the church, the church has many flaws. And, I get it. And I could add to the stories that we have, right? But I've become more, even though I know so much, I've become more rather than less convinced of the need for the church. And even as an institution, because we were never meant to live this Christian life alone. We are a body, an organic, interconnected whole. And that's fundamental to the idea of finitude. We need one another, and that need doesn't make us weak or bad. It doesn't make us bad or morally compromised. It makes us good creatures. But it takes courage to start plugging in a little bit because it's a risk. But it is interesting. It's not just young people, as you guys know, it's older people who've also checked out and they need to be brought back into organic life together as well.
Yeah, I know. I'm grateful for Bob in that
Mm,
circumstance, just because even though we knew each other and I left, well, CCO in 2018, but we always have kept a relationship. We've
yeah.
always kept texting each other back and forth, calling each other, and then having this podcast where we can just check in and
Mm.
yeah, again, it's kind of
I wish I could say that's mutual, but sorry.
a yeah, it's really one way.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
right.
one way.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, I think anyone that can, that's a good point. I think both sides need it, and I think that is a huge area where the
Right.
church can step in,
Yeah.
and offer those relationships and offer those studies. Of course, I think there's a time and place where the church can say, "Hey, we're going to have a young men's Bible study."
Oh,
That's
yeah, yeah,
great.
yeah, for sure.
But I think what needs to happen more so is, yeah, learn from people different than you.
Yeah.
Learn from people that are like, even, I think I mentioned this on the podcast before, but even when my wife and I got married, one of the advice to us was have friends that are like just a little bit down the road,
Yeah.
like not even further down the road than you, but just a little bit, a couple of years, just so you can talk with like, hey, this came up. What like
Yeah.
how do we navigate this? What happens here?
Yes.
And
Oh, that's good.
it's so edifying and it's so helpful. So yeah, finding those people that you can bring along, but then are maybe just a year or two ahead
Mm,
of you, and then 50 years ahead of you. I
yeah.
mean, just bringing those people in
Mm,
can change a lot of your perspective.
yeah. That's a good word.
So I have a question. Can I ask a question?
I guess you can come out of timeout, Bob.
Yeah. All right. We'll let you back in. All right.
I love this idea of we're limited human beings.
Mm.
We don't have to have anxiety because of that, but I need you to help me figure this out. When is my inability to do what I want to do sin?
Mm,
And when is it just the goodness of my finitude?
yeah. It's a really good and hard question, as you know. My short answer kind of relates to what we were just talking about. I have discovered for example, am not the best judge of that when it comes to me. And some of it becomes how we're raised, different voices in our heads from experience to other kinds of things, church experiences, whatever. It's become very important for me to think in terms of like farmers. To be a farmer, there are times when it's harvest and you work like 14 to 15 hours a day or more. It's just that's what it is, and you need to do it. There's nothing morally bad about that. In fact, it's very noble and right. Nothing wrong with that. The problem is what's happened is with technological advances, including basically like electricity, we now think you should be able to do that every day. Every day is harvest, which is a huge problem. So, for example, there are, given my work, sometimes I have to work really long periods. Maybe there's a deadline or something, but it can only be for a short time, right? It can only be, so sometimes I'll be at home and maybe it'll be night and my wife walks by me and I'm on my laptop and she'll be like, wait, are you working right now? And I might be like, well, it's not really harvest. And I'm like, "What?" And she'll just stop me. She says, "You're done, ESPN right now." And it's a beautiful joke in our family, but the reason why it matters is if 2 minutes earlier I would walk into the bathroom and look at myself in the mirror and say, "Kelly, you put in a full day. Do something else." I would say, "You lazy. You're not,"
Mm.
because I'm not a trustworthy person on this. I have a skewed perspective. So I need people who love me, who I can trust, who will speak into my life and say it's enough. And in a different situation, it might be that someone needs to be told, no, you need to keep working, right? So I do think like small groups are super helpful to help you go, hey, this is kind of what's going on in my life. And let these people who know you and trust you be honest with them. And sometimes you'll find that they're like, that is insane. That is way too much. It's okay. You need to say no to some of these things or you need to whatever. But sometimes they'll say, listen, I think you're not showing up in ways that are impoverishing us in our community and are hurting you. You need to step up. So I don't think there's a simple way, but my short answer to you is I don't know how to answer it well without community because I find, at least for myself and most others that I know, on our own, we're not great at judging these things. We really need others. And you guys have probably experienced this, where with all sincerity, if I look at one of my friends and I'll see everything that's happening, I'm like, hey, you need to be compassionate to yourself. Like, listen to God's benediction over your life. Like, you are in grace. Slow down. And I mean it and I feel it 100%. But for whatever reason, to say it to myself is so much harder. And even if I try, I don't believe myself. So I need people that I believe who bring me grace and give me perspective because then I can navigate between when it's sin and when it's not. So the parents who feel perpetually guilty because their kids can't do all of these things desperately need some people to speak in their life and say, you are not a bad parent because you're not going to all these play dates and your kid isn't signed up for Mandarin and 17 instruments and like none of that's bad. But to do it on our own. I do think you get these pockets of resistance. That's where it gets healthy. You get these college students. My work study student just the other day, she handed me her phone and it was black and white. You get these pockets of students who are resisting because they can sense this is not working. We need pockets of community to do it different, but to do it on your own is too hard.
We're not fully engaged with each other. We're not fully engaged in the presence of God. And so it just keeps on creating this cycle of not understanding what's going on. Life is just hard.
Yeah.
Everything is hovel, right? Everything is a vapor.
Vapor. Yeah.
We feel like we're just chasing after the wind. And so the Koheleth talks about this, right, in Ecclesiastes. But Ecclesiastes ends with, now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. So you talk about this. How does the fear of the Lord overcome the fears we have because of our human limitations?
Yeah, that's great. It is interesting because biblically, like occasionally, fear of the Lord, there is something about being scared of God, but by and large, the fear of the Lord is not about being scared of God. So it's a very interesting ancient expression that's hard for us to understand. But the simplest way I know how to get at it, and this gets to everything we were talking about earlier with the challenge of being present with God and with others. The fear of the Lord biblically, the beginning of wisdom and all these kind of things, it's actually about a change of perspective. The fear of the Lord is fundamentally about recognizing God's presence, his provision, and perspective and those kind of things. So the idea is you were staring down at your navel, right? You're looking at your belly button, you're absorbed with all the anxieties and fears of the world. And the fear of the Lord is lifting your gaze from your belly button to the horizon and seeing a larger, grander story. And that God is actually working, and that allows for patience and perspective and courage. So I do think the fear of the Lord is really about, in some ways, paying attention. God is present, and those who fear the Lord, it's a way of saying they recognize his presence. They have eyes to see and ears to hear. But you don't tend to have eyes to see and ears to hear without slowing down and looking and seeing, right? There's, oh gosh, what's the name of the artist off the top of my head? Very famous, not Crisp. But anyways, one of the things they do, which I remember when I was younger, I saw some of the, like they took these white, huge, massive curtains or sheets, however you want to say it, and would put them over the German parliament in Berlin, right? Or when I lived in California, they took over the Grapevine where you drive, they had these like hundreds of these massive yellow umbrellas, like metal umbrellas they put up. And at first you're like, that is the dumbest thing ever, right? Why is anyone paying them to do this? And they've done these kind of things around the world. But part of what's happening is when you walk by the German parliament and you're in Berlin or whatever every day, you actually never see it. And what's brilliant is by covering it for an extended period of time, it's all you can see. And it's always been there, but you've stopped seeing it, right? The Grapevine, you're not looking anymore. It's just a drive. And by what they call defamiliarizing, it's not that you're making new things up. You're finally starting to see something that's always been there. And I think the fear of the Lord is just really about recognizing what's always been there. But in our anxiety and our worry and our speed, we've stopped seeing. We've stopped seeing God. We've stopped seeing the fingerprints of his kindness and his grace and his provision. And it makes us filled with anxiety because we think we're on our own.
Well, that's a great place to end right there. We don't need to be anxious. We need to fear the Lord. Look up. Look up.
Yeah, look up. I like that. That's good.
Look up. I don't like the view of my belly button anyways. I might as well look up.
As we get older, it gets harder to see too, right?
Now every time I see it, that's what I'm going to think about. So,
But I love that. I think there's something really healthy about us remembering we're not creating our own realities.
yes, very important. Yeah.
Well, thank you guys. This has been great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks for
Thank you,
joining
Kelly.
us.
Appreciate it.
We're honored for your joining us.
You got it.
It's always those episodes I feel convicted.
Convicted of.
Always that topic. I think there's a lot of times I have to remind myself with how blessed I am, because I was able to graduate college, get married shortly after, find a career that I enjoy, buy a house. Like, all of these things are great and blessings, but sometimes you can view the blessing as a curse or as a difficulty. Like, specifically with just if there's like house projects going on that I know I need to work on, it just eats away at my brain. I tell Brielle all the time, I tell her, my brain physically won't relax until it's done. And so, like, no matter what, even when I sleep, I will wake myself up in the middle of the night thinking about it, and not really consciously. Like, it's just in my brain. And so I'm not allowing myself to like get rid of it, or knowing, hey, this will get done. I am working towards this. So I feel like that kind of stuff can be hard. My brain it loves to ruminate. And when that happens, I have to remind myself, like, hey, there's only so many hours in a day, or like, hey, you had a really long day, you had some hard stuff that came up. It's okay that you didn't do that today. You're allowed to sit and watch television tonight. Like, it's okay.
I was talking to one of my students. His schedule got really crazy because he took on a full-time job and he's still a full-time student. It's like, how do I do this, right? And you have to set yourself up to be able to have a master schedule of some sort so that you can say, this is the time I'm doing this, this is the time I'm doing that, and this is the time when I'm not doing this and not doing that. And so that when you're having, he likes the game. So I'm like, how many times are you gaming and you feeling guilty that you're not doing your homework? All the time. Well, wouldn't it be fun to play a game and say, I'm allowed to play this game?
Yeah, guilt-free, shame-free.
Right? Because I've allotted this. This is my slot of time where I'm allowed to relax and do what I want to do. And it's good. It's fine. And I don't have to worry about those other things. Why? Because I have slotted times I'm going to do those things. Those things will be done. I don't have to worry about doing those things all the time. Especially, I think leisure is meant to be leisure, right? Recreation is meant to be recreation, and it's part of the goodness of being human. And yet we feel guilty doing it because there's work to be done.
Yeah, always.
Right?
Yeah, that's good. That's good advice. Like, because we don't think about that. We think about all the time that we need to dedicate to do something, but we don't think of, like, okay, after 8 p.m. on Tuesdays and Thursdays or Mondays and Wednesdays, like, that's my time. That is my time to play a video game and just relax. Like, I am not responsible for something to come up. Given there's always, like, oh, okay, like, my schedule got weird this week or whatever.
Yeah, right,
but like,
right.
blocking that time, we don't really think about it, especially as a college student. I mean, I remember I worked full time for a couple of years because I had to pay my way through college, and so I was working full time and I had a full time class schedule. Yeah, and I remember being like, "It's just what I have to do. It's just what I have to do." But I didn't care enough about the stuff that I didn't have to do, but the stuff that was edifying to me and would help refill my cup and allow me to take a rest.
Right. I think college students, procrastination is the biggest problem for most college students. It's like, I got these projects and I'm just going to wait and wait and wait to do them, right? And
Yeah.
so what did you do yesterday? I gamed for a few hours. And wouldn't it have been fun to be able to game without feeling guilty that you have a project to do? But get the project done first and then video game as your reward for getting the project done. Students' eyes bright. I mean, seriously, their eyes light up and are like, that's genius.
Yeah.
Why didn't I think of that? Right.
Right. Yeah. And truthfully, it's just common sense. It's just common sense, but and I think it changes things when college students realize that God, the creator of the universe, the most organized person, like God cares about you playing video games. Like he wants you to watch a movie and relax. He wants
Right.
you to do that. He cares about that. So, but like we do not see it that way. And especially as a college student, we're I know I shouldn't be doing this, but like I'm just so tired that I'm gonna binge a show on Netflix. But it's like, hey, what if I told you that God actually wants you to watch this show? Like he wants you to reset your mind and to be able to relax. So if you balance your time correctly, you can have that guilt-free, shame-free time to do that.
Kelly in the book actually says what we'd end up doing with it, watching Netflix or playing a video game. What we're doing is we're binging on that stuff because we're not properly related to it, and
Yeah.
what we're doing is we're escaping the stuff that we're supposed to be doing by doing that instead of being finite human beings and saying, I can only do so much, so I'm going to get this stuff done. But I also, as a finite human being, need time to relax and to leisure and have fun. And it's not all about all this other stuff. But what we end up doing is escaping into scrolling or video gaming or whatever because the work is too much and we're so overwhelmed that we can't do it all and we think we have to do it all. And so what we end up doing is escaping that feeling of I got to do this all, and it just compounds the problem.
Yeah. Here I am getting convicted again. But I think back to when I was a college student and I was a big time procrastinator. Past David. That's all, I've talked about that past
That
David.
that that David's that past David.
Past David would watch 10 too many Netflix episodes. And then present David would be really upset at past David for doing that and not, so I remember that in college, but I still find myself doing that. I still find myself is using these means that can be good and healthy and should be in my life, but I use them to escape because I use them to go, ooh, that's really hard, or I don't even know where to start. Well, guess I'll sit and do this instead because it's easy. Um, and so there's time for both. It's not saying one or the other is bad. It's just a balance of where am I putting my time when I need to put in my time. Like working on what I should be working on during that allotted time, and am I resting when I should be resting during that allotted time? It's a balance.